Okay, so welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Gillian Gibson from the EAUC Scotland office, and you've joined our webinar today on the Scottish Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Reporting Training, looking specifically at the wider influence section. It should last about an hour, and we're going to be hearing from the team at SSN, and then there'll be a chance for questions. So just a little bit of housekeeping about how the webinar works. So as viewers, just now, if you could keep yourselves muted and your videos off, which is easiest, so that while SSN are presenting, there'll be stops throughout the webinar just so that you can ask questions. Please feel free during the webinar, though, if you think of any questions, to write them in the chat box. So you'll find that option if you click on participants, and if you can just select everyone and then ask your question there, and we'll pick those up and you can ask the team. So keep those coming throughout, but the team will pick those up and do it throughout as well. So yeah, if you're having any technical issues at all, also go to the chat function and give me a message. I'm the EAUC host, so just give me a shout there if there's anything. While the presentation's up, feel free during the presentation to minimize or move the box that has the videos of faces so that you can see the full screen. It would also be great if you could take a minute just to make sure that you have your full name and institution, just so that we know who's on the call. You can do that by clicking on participants and then hovering over your name, and you will find it says rename. That'd be great. So your name and your institution, if possible. So yeah, the webinar will be recorded, and we'll be uploading this as a resource onto the Sustainability Exchange with all the presentations. We'll have that sorted this week for you, and we'll get it emailed out as well. Yep, and once the webinar has been finished, we'll send you a short survey for us to get your feedback. If you could take a few minutes, that would be great to complete that, just so that we can improve all our future events and webinars. So now I'm going to hand over to Jennifer and Cara from Sustainable Scotland Network to talk about the wider influences section of the public body's climate change duties. Cara?
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Sustainable Scotland Network webinar. As Gillian has said, we'll be talking today about the wider influence section of the Public Body's Climate Change Report. So just some introductions. I'm Cara from SSN, and this is Jennifer. Hello. And between the two of us, we'll be presenting the session today. So Gillian's mentioned using the chat feature for questions. We'd like the session to be as interactive as it can be, really, for a webinar, so please do send questions through. We've got a couple of pauses during the presentation for questions, and then we've got time at the end as well. And anything that we don't get to today, we can follow up afterwards. So any questions at all, just send those through. Okay, so this is a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. So Jennifer will start off by talking us through what is wider influence reporting, why your institution might consider doing it, what the benefits are. Then we're going to take a quick look at how the education sector reported on wider influence in last year's reports, to give you a feel for the information that we've already had coming through from the education sector. And then the bulk of the session will be that last point there, so going through each of the questions in the reporting template. Jennifer will talk through the kind of format of the question and how we would expect you to approach it, and some examples of information you can report. And then for each question, I'll bring up some examples of, again, how education sector institutions have reported last year, to give you a feel for the type of information that people are reporting there. So I'll hand over to Jennifer to kick us off.
Thank you, Cara. So what is wider influence reporting? So this section, this non-mandatory section, is an opportunity for public bodies to detail climate change policies and actions that have an impact beyond your corporate estate. The majority of influence that public bodies have is beyond their corporate estate. In the case of education institutions, this will include a lot of the work that you do with students, visitors to your different institutions, also a lot of the different research projects that you undertake in relation to climate change. We know there's also a lot of work to incorporate sustainability into your curriculum, and there's a whole suite of projects that you do with other public bodies, third sector organisations, etc. This section of the template is your opportunity to capture all of this good information. We believe it's the section of the whole report that's most relevant to the education sector, as it's so closely tied to your different functions. So what are the benefits of completing this non-mandatory section? Well, really, it's an opportunity for you to showcase a lot of the fantastic work that you're doing. We hear a lot through EAUC and through yourself, so all of these projects that you do. Use the reports to document this and to show all of these great things that you're doing. By including the information there, you're not only promoting what you're doing, it's also a fantastic resource for everyone else. Through SSN and through EAUC, as public bodies contact us and want to hear about different projects that public bodies are doing. And we can use these reports to do some research and find out who's doing different projects, and then link up the appropriate public bodies with each other to learn from one another, and where applicable run events and training based on these different findings. There's also a benefit in completing this section now, while it's not mandatory, as it may become mandatory in the future. So there's an opportunity to start to complete the sections and get more familiar with this part of the template, in case if it ever did become mandatory as well.
Okay, so here we've got a summary of the reporting last year from the education sector. So there were 42 education institutions who submitted a climate change report last year, and of those 42, 11 reported some form of information under the wider influence section. So obviously 11 out of 42 is relatively low, and that's one of the drivers for having this session today, is to see if we can, I guess, increase awareness. The table shows within the 11 who reported, it shows the breakdown of which sections institutions reported. So we'll talk about this a bit later, but there's no requirement if you're completing this voluntary section to tackle every question. So it might be that there's one or two that right now you think, oh, well, yes, we're in a good position to report on that. So you can start with that, and then as you go through the reporting process in future years, you can look to expand that as well. So don't be put off if you feel that some of the questions aren't really aligned with where you are at the moment. So just looking at the table, as you can see, the first two questions are around historic emissions and targets, and we didn't have any education institutions last year who reported on these. With historic emissions, there's a couple of reasons for that. So typically a lot of the historic emission information is most relevant for local authorities. But there is useful information, and Jennifer will talk a bit more about that you could be reporting, potentially could be reporting under historic emissions. We're also aware that last year the reporting template didn't particularly make it easy for the non-local authorities to report here, so we have made some changes to the form this year as well, so Jennifer will talk about that as well. And again, targets, no one reporting on that, so we'll talk a little bit more about how you might approach the target section. Mission to influence is an organisation talking about whether they have a strategy or a plan in place to influence beyond their corporate boundary. And we had 3 institutions reporting on that, only 1 reporting on policies and actions. And so then you'll see the next 2 sections, partnerships and capacity building and key actions, is where the bulk of the information really came through. And there's some really, really good stuff reported, and we'll share some examples of that as well. And then finally, further activity is really just a catch-all and we had about half of the institutions using that. So we'll just take a quick pause in case anyone has any initial questions on the context, the background slide that we've shared. I don't think there's any questions so far. We'll just pause for 30 seconds or so if anybody wants to send anything through, and then we'll continue on. It doesn't seem like there's a rush of questions so far, so maybe just carry on. So we're now going to go through each section of the reporting template and talk about what the question is looking for and then some examples of information that you might report.
Thank you, Cara. So question 1, as Cara mentioned, no education institutions completed this last year. We made some improvements to this question as it was most appropriate for local authorities. So they now see a different table to yourselves. They see what they saw last year, whereas all non-local authorities will see this new table that you can see on the slide. So it's a lot simpler than before, because a lot of the previous table was not relevant for non-local authorities. So hopefully this is more appropriate. With this particular table, it's a chance to add any other data that you collect beyond your corporate estate. So this could be transport data, it could be travel data from students, land use, if you keep this, anything to do with biodiversity. You may not have data that goes as far back as 2005, as this table allows you to input, but you would just start to complete it from where you did collect the particular data from. You can add in as many different data sources as necessary by using the Add feature, which is below the comments box. With this question, you may not collect any data beyond your corporate estate, and that's absolutely fine. You would just skip this question and then move on to the questions that are relevant. So don't feel that you have to put something here if that would stop you doing the rest of the template. We understand that not all public bodies do gather this data, but we do hope that the changes that we've made this year would enable it to be simpler for any data that is captured to be included here. So Cara will give you some examples of things that we think could be relevant to the education sector.
Yeah, so like we said, we've got no real life examples to share, but we had to think about some of the types of historic information that institutions might have. So Jen mentioned travel information, so whether you record student trip information, cycling statistics, anything like that. Your waste data, so we know often an example is waste from student residences, often is it scoped into the corporate footprint. This is an opportunity in the wider influence section to capture that information if you do have it, if it is able to be recorded separate to your corporate information. And likewise, energy data as well, so it may be that you can break down your core corporate data from your halls of residence. So that's another example of the type of information that you might want to capture in this question.
So question 2A is looking for any information on any targets that you set. And similar to question 1, you may not have targets for non-corporate activities. And if that's the case, again, you would leave this blank and focus on questions 3 to 5, which we will get to after this. But you may find that there are targets that you want to capture here, whether that's around energy use or overall emissions per student. It would depend on the institution here. Cara will give some examples of things in a minute. But with this particular table, if you do start to include a target and you don't have everything for every box, that's okay as well. So you can start to complete each line, include what you can, and leave anything blank that you don't have. And there's a sort of general rule of thumb with this non-mandatory section. Actually, leaving boxes blank is quite useful because we can then see where people aren't getting data or what we can help with a bit more. There's also a bit more flexibility with this section of the template, that if certain questions need tweaked or boxes need removed, we can do that, and we can do that based on what public bodies can actually input and what they're able to get internally. So don't be afraid to leave boxes blank. That's absolutely fine.
Okay, so again, we've just put together a couple of examples of the things that you might set targets for. So a target could be an overall target, or it could be more project-based, and often I think we find that's a bit more achievable for people, and it certainly does help in terms of monitoring progress. A target's really useful for that. So some examples, you might set a waste target around reducing waste to landfill from particular halls of residence or overall from all halls of residence by a particular percentage. Or likewise, you might be focusing a lot on green transport, so maybe you're aiming to reduce student car trips by a certain amount or increase cycling rates by a certain percentage. So those are the types of things that we would suggest you could use the targets question for, and again, only to the extent that you're able to have the information.
Question 2B is looking for information on any strategies, plans and policies that you have. Again, this is beyond the corporate policies, plans and strategies that you have. So looking solely at your wider influence here. So this would be plans, policies and strategies to for climate change, for example, perhaps with students, with visitors, your overall influence strategies here. Where possible, we encourage links to be provided to external documents. It's a really useful resource. Back to sort of knowledge sharing that we mentioned before. If people asked us who's doing particularly good strategies, we'd be able to go and look at them and then link up public bodies for that particular function.
Okay, so we did have some really good examples reported last year around this. So we've just put some up here. So an example there, Edinburgh College, they told us about their sustainability policy and how they have particular objectives around how they influence students, communities and contractors that they work with. So that's really outside that corporate boundary and that wider reach that they have. University of Strathclyde have got a few different policies and plans in place. So their strategic plan out to 2020 where they're focusing on their wider influence and some of their broader kind of regional work that they're doing as well. And likewise University of Edinburgh, so they told us about their climate strategy out to 2026. And also they talked about research that they're doing as an institution around all these topics that you can see here. And these are all really good examples of the types of things that we imagine there's a lot more than 3 institutions that have policies like this in place or initiatives like this in place. So that should hopefully give you a flavour of the type of information that you would report here.
So question 3 is looking for the policies and actions you have, and again related to your wider influence here. And like the rest of the templates, provide as much information as you can. So you would do a table like this for each different policy and action, and you can add in as many as necessary. It may look like a lot of boxes, but once you start to kind of look across them, it's information that we hope that would be collected per different project. So there's the start year, there's a year it's first implemented, what the status is, is it live, is it complete, what's your delivery role in a particular project, what's the value of investment that you're putting into this project, how are you funding this particular project. So you would complete a box like this per different project that you put in. There's also the opportunity to leave comments at the bottom there. So if there was something particularly unique about it, or if there was data that you couldn't get for whatever reason, or something you thought would be interesting to add, you can do so in the comments box there. So just for each project, complete as much as you can, but again, don't be afraid to leave blank boxes. And this can be used for retrospective and future projects. There's the functionality to do that. And as I say, you can add and remove as many as necessary.
Okay, so as I mentioned when we looked at the summary of the sector, there was one education institution who reported some policies and actions last year, and that was University of St Andrews. And they reported quite a range of projects, as you can see there, and actions. So everything from transport, waste, land use. They talked about their role as part of their transition initiative, working with communities in terms of food co-ops, carbon conversations. So really quite a range of actions. And again, I think we would envisage that there's definitely more than one institution that's involved in this. So in these types of activities. So that's just a feel for the types of information that you could be providing here.
So we're going to take another opportunity for questions. There's not any come through on the chat box, but we'll pause for about a minute in case anybody wants to add anything in here.
Maybe everyone's still waking up Monday morning. Okay, so we've got a question here from Gilbert at Perth College about potential confusion about what is central and what is wider influence. It's a great question. Yeah. Jen, do you want to?
Sure. So the corporate activities is everything that you'd be capturing within the mandatory section of the report. So particularly if you're looking at section 2, 3, 4 and 5 of the template. So anything to do with your emissions, so the emissions, electricity, gas use, waste, water, transport for your operations, for your staff, your buildings, that's your corporate footprint. And then your wider influence footprint is the things you do beyond that. So so your student travel, the waste in your halls of residence. So it's the things that, I wouldn't say you don't have as direct a control over, but it's the kind of things that's not quite as in-house. Yeah, you say that's, yeah. Same with sort of adaptation as well. It's the kind of the wider reach that you have. So not just purely focused on your buildings and your vehicles and your operations. We're getting a few questions in, so we'll read them just now, and we'll if you give us a second. There's another response from Gilbert there. So Gilbert saying, student travel on trips, is that central or wider influence? So you're talking about the distinction between student travel on a trip for university versus student travel for commuting to and from university. Yeah, so commuting would be into your wider influence there, and student trips as well into your wider influence. Yeah. Some questions on the yeah, we've got quite a few questions coming in, so bear with us. This is good. Just yeah. A second. Yes, so we've got a question from Trudy there. So she from University of Dundee. So if you have already listed your travel plan in the mandatory reporting, would you still mention the activities in it and the wider influence? So your bike pool, lift share in the extra sector. Yes, you would. That's exactly the correct approach. So it's not so much repeating what you're doing. It would be those trips that you're encouraging staff and students to do outside of, so if it's a bike pool system, for example, they may use that for other trips, so that would be captured in your wider influence section, yes.
Yes, we would hope that there wouldn't be a need for repetition, but it's more separating the information. So what information do you report in the corporate, the mandatory section in relation to your core activities from the travel plan, so what's relevant, and then what's the stuff that's actually beyond the corporate footprint, that's where you would actually report that in the wider influence section instead of in the main part of the report.
A few more questions. Sure. So we've had a question in saying about how will the targets be used if we don't meet the targets. Will we be penalised in any way? No, you won't be penalised. Well, it's not going to be used to track and say who's on track and who's not. It's more a tool to help. If you're not on track, how would you be attacking that in-house to meet that shortfall? It's more a tool for yourself to use it in that sense. We won't be coming in and saying you've not met your target this year, or that's so more an internal. It's, if you do have targets and you are putting them and you're setting them, but you're not meeting them, it would be an opportunity to say, we have this shortfall, we're not on target, we're documenting this, we should be stepping up our projects here to try and meet this shortfall. But I do understand your hesitation there, and that's not alone in the education sector. Same with the targets in the mandatory section too. People are hesitant to put targets in the fear that what happens if they miss them. We do understand that.
Do you have any other questions that we haven't picked up yet? Okay, so some great questions there. Thank you. We'll move on, but we've got plenty of time as well at the end for any more questions that we'll have.
So question 4, and this was the question that the majority of institutions that completed this section last year put information into. So that was brilliant, and Carol will give us lots of great examples shortly. But hopefully when you hear it, if you didn't do it last year, it'll register that you have a lot of similar information that could be included here. So this particular question is looking for projects and partnership working that you do, any communications that you do, whether that's with students, visitors, capacity building, training, again, work with students you may do to promote recycling, etc. So in the same way with the rest of the templates, just complete as much as you can. The columns themselves it's information we hope you would keep. So what is the project, what's your role in it, who's leading on it if it's not you, and who are the other public bodies that you work with, or third sector bodies. There's a comments box at the end to leave further information. The box is bigger in real life than it is in that slide, so do use it to leave as much information as you can, and that will make the sort of information sharing between public bodies and ourselves a lot easier if we know the background and the context. This question is it's a really great resource, as we found that people have came to us and asked who's working with who, what type of projects are they doing. So we'd really like to build this up because it would make a really good sort of national picture of what's going on. There's a whole, it's incredible actually the amount that's going on across the public sector, and we're only really scratching the surface. So we'd like to develop this much further this year.
Okay, so plenty of examples in the reports from last year. So Borders College, for example, they talked about their work with the Scottish Borders Council on economy and low carbon work streams. Quite a few institutions talked about their links with EAUC And obviously that is a really great example of kind of partnership working, knowledge exchange, training and research going on across the sector in relation to climate change. Here at Watt University there, they've got quite a range of things. So they talked about their involvement in the SEAP, which is the Sustainable Energy Action Plan. So that's a broader regional look at climate change action, and so they talked about their role in that. As you can see there, talking about knowledge transfer partnerships and also teaching programs with climate change implications. So we know that a lot of you have climate change embedded into your syllabus, or sustainability measures embedded into your syllabus. So this is a place where you can mention that as well. Glasgow School of Art, again, quite a range. They talked about a number of initiatives that they're involved in. You can see up there, again, work with the EAUC, some kind of cross Glasgow initiatives as well. And I put at the bottom there basically all of the other institutions. So would remind you that all of these reports are publicly available on our website, and there's a lot of really, really good stuff being reported by the sector in general. So definitely have a look and see the detail behind. So we're just obviously summarising here, but have a look at the reports and see the detail behind the types of initiatives that are being reported. I'm sure a lot of these are ringing bells for many of you who might not be doing the wider influence reporting at the moment. So have a think about any opportunities to.
And from that list there, you may want to contact, because we know a lot of you are already in contact with one another to discuss their wider influence. So those examples at the bottom there are good ones to go and investigate on our website. Question 5 is looking for the sort of, further key actions you may have. This covers food and drink, biodiversity, projects to do with water, procurement and resource use. I'd encourage you to give as clear a description as you can, because we had a wide range of projects reported here, lots of brilliant projects, but the more information that you can give us here, the better in the description box. So it's a catch-all question for a lot of the fantastic work that's going on. So you'd, in the same way as the rest of the templates, just add a new line for each different action that you're doing and the impact that you expect that would have.
Okay, so looking at examples from last year, so most of the categories were reported against. So food and drink, a range of sustainable food policies, community growing. Glasgow School of Art talked about their campaign to increase consumption of vegetables and reducing meat consumption across the campus. Biodiversity, so a lot of work on landscaping and optimising estate design. Strathclyde told us about their community garden and biodiversity policy. Water is a topic that typically across the public sector doesn't really get reported on particularly well or in much detail. So a really great example there from Queen Margaret University around their focus on their water capture and use and what they're doing to tackle that. And resource use, so reuse, recycling, initiatives like WARPIT. So we know quite a lot of you use that, possibly for your corporate activities as well as what we would call your wider influence. So those are the examples that we saw reported last year. And that brings us to the end of the questions of the reporting template. So if anyone does have any follow-up questions from either from earlier on in the session or on those last couple of sections as well, we'll pause for another minute or so and then we'll just do a final wrap up.
just give it another 20 seconds to be sure.
Also, maybe just to say that if there's anyone on the phone that can't type a message, then feel free to bring yourself off mute as well, just to ask. But I think there's one from Gilbert there just now.
Okay, so bring that up.
How do you feel about targets for tons, CO2 equivalent per square metre, and absolute targets in a change in campus size? So when it comes to the sort of targets for your estate, that would fall under your mandatory section. We can have a discussion sort of offline about sort of your target setting for your corporate estate, if that would be helpful. I'm more than happy to.
I think in terms of, you know, relative versus absolute targets, I think it sits with you, I guess, to determine what's going to be most relevant in terms of a target. So we can certainly, yeah, as Jennifer said, talk through that and provide more guidance around the two options. But it will depend a lot as well on the institution in terms of what's going to be most easiest for you to measure and track as well. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just before we wrap up, we just put a link here to our website. So we have a range of resources on our website, more detailed guidance, so around all of the reporting, so the mandatory reporting and the wider influence section as well, and some more guidance about how to use the platform, the reporting platform, in terms of filling in the questions. We've got training slides as well for each of the sections of the report, and some populated examples which we've just recently published. So that is similar to what we've done today, but a more detailed examples of each question within the reporting templates, all the mandatory questions and the voluntary section as well. And that'll be a mixture of education institutions and other bodies from across the public sector. So I would encourage you to have a look at those and see, you know, even out with the education sector, what are the types of things that people are reporting, and there might be some synergies there. Obviously, you are quite unique, so there's probably more value from the education reports, but certainly would be worthwhile to look more broadly if you can. Tackle any questions in the lead up. If you need any support at all with any elements of the reporting, then please do send us an email or give us a call, and we'll happily help as best we can. And I think, unless we have any final questions, I think that's probably us ready to wrap up. So we'll hand back over to Gillian, but just to say thank you all for tuning in today, and hopefully it's been a useful session. And for those of you who haven't started doing wider influence reporting, hopefully maybe it's given you an idea of the types of things that you might start to think about. And even if you are doing some elements of the report at the moment, then there's always scope to look more broadly as well. So thanks.
I've just been able to see the slides. So when you finished all this, can you, and when everyone else is logged off, can you just quickly flick all the slides back up again? I'm screen grabbing them so that I can, I missed all the slides earlier on, but I've been listening, so that'd be helpful.
Hi, David. We'll be sending out the slides with the recording, and it'll all be together, so you can play it out, play it through all together again. And so that should be sent out sort of later today, tomorrow. Okay?
Fair enough.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. So thank you again, and we'll hand back to Gillian to close the session.
Okay, just to say a big thanks to Jen and Cara for going through that. It's been so useful to actually see it question by question and get some good examples there from the sector. So thank you so much. Like I said, we'll be going, this has all been recorded, so we'll get it up on the website and send the link out to everyone. We'll also be sending out a survey as well, if you wouldn't mind filling that out just to hear how you found it. Yeah, and if you do have any questions, feel free to email Scotland at EAUC as well, and the SSN email address is there too. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. That's been great. And thanks again to SSN there. And I hope you all have a good day then. And you'll be able to leave the meeting through the bottom right-hand corner. There's a link there. Brilliant. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.